If you've ever been caught up in a layoff, you know how big of an ego hit it can be. And it's easy to start second guessing yourself and wondering why you were selected out of all the people in your organization. So in this video, I'm going to share how companies decide which employees end up on the layoff list. We're all familiar with this story. One day you're working intently and a meeting notice pops up on your calendar that seems kind of unusual. So you log into it, you're met with an HR person at the other end, and you're thinking, this doesn't seem right. And of course, what they proceed to do is present you with the terms of your severance and informing you that your position has been affected in a reduction in force. And of course, your mind's left racing, you're scrambling to try to make sense of what happened, and they're all the while assuring you that it's not your fault. Well, in a lot of cases, it's actually not your fault. So let's give you some of those reasons why you ended up on that layoff list. The first and most obvious reason, and the one that people tend to jump to the most negative conclusions about when they hear that you got laid off, is that it was performance related. Now, this is a case of your performance being lower than the rest of your team or the rest of your department or the rest of people in similar departments across the organization. And they will typically look at overall performance or output or something that is measurable. Those KPIs or that board that's in your team room that tracks everybody's performance in a very visible manner is probably the best indicator of whether or not you would be on a layoff list should your company decide to downsize. So if you notice that you're tracking below the rest of your teammates, it might be a warning sign for you to start stepping up your performance as soon as possible, because rest assured, that's the first place that they're going to look when they go to determine who's going to be on the layoff list. Another indicator here might also be your performance appraisal rating, because they will often pull performance appraisal data and then look at the lowest performers on the list. In addition to that, they may also do things like a 9 box where they'll ask the managers to go in and rank the people in order. And who ends up falling in the bottom quadrants of that 9 box typically end up on a layoff list as well. Now, it's unfortunate, but let's be realistic here. The people that are on the lower level of the performance spectrum are probably going to get caught up first in the layoffs. But of course, being laid off doesn't mean that you're automatically a performance issue. And in fact, most of the reasons why people get laid off have nothing to do with performance at all. The second major reason why people end up getting laid off is that they fall under seniority. Oftentimes, companies will lay off the newer tenured employees on the team. So it's kind of this last in, first out mentality, where oftentimes companies will look at people who have joined the company recently, and they'll often be targeted as the first to go. And this is one of the reasons why there's considerable risk to leaving a safe haven of a place that you might have been for a few years to go and take a new job, because you may be the low person on the totem pole. So if you're leaving your safety nest to take on a new role with a new company, just make sure that you're outperforming the people that are in the department that you're joining, because seniority alone is not going to be enough to keep you off the layoff list if your performance is lower than everybody else. The next reason you might get laid off is due to your skills or the lack thereof, or it might even be specific to your role and whether or not that role is still needed in the organization. Now, of course, this could be taken as a performance issue, but it's not really, because if you have skills that are just becoming obsolete, that the company doesn't really need anymore, then they're still going to add you to the layoff list because they simply don't need it anymore. The same thing goes for certain job types or certain roles where the organization has just evolved beyond them. And if you haven't evolved with the market, then you could find yourself on a layoff list pretty easily. So if it was me, I would be taking a very close look at what the industry in general is doing, where the market is moving, making sure that I have the latest iterations of all the software skills or the technical skills that are in demand on the broader market, and then probably pay close attention to where your company is evolving. And if there's any edicts coming down the line, I probably want to pay close attention to them and say, okay, they're bringing in this new software. I should reskill myself and become the expert in that, because it's going to keep the target off your back if you've maintained current skills. The same thing goes for job type or role. There are certain roles and organizations that are just no longer needed as the market continues to evolve. And I think we'll see this continue to accelerate with the rise of AI's popularity in the workplace. And it's certainly a case of adapt or be left behind. So be paying close attention to what's going on in the market. Now, next up might be due to departmental need. And this one's a very common one, especially in layoffs that happened in tech over the last several years. Departmental need might mean that the department is changing their focus and they've de-emphasized a certain product or a certain group and they just simply no longer need it. Didn't have anything to do with performance, but rather the strategic direction of the organization. And unfortunately, people get caught up in these layoffs, even though they may be top performers or may have just even gotten promoted into that division. And unfortunately, I know more than one person who has joined a company or was just promoted into a new role inside of a division, only to find out that the leadership team changes and then shifts their strategic direction and then de-emphasizes the project that that person was on. And then they end up on the unemployment line. Again, this is through no fault of their own. Now, of course, there's no real way to predict this circumstance, but there are ways to de-risk it happening to you. For example, I may not join an organization that has an experimental new project or a skunk works of some sort, and I'm joining it to try to get it off the ground, especially in a time when there's economic uncertainty, because oftentimes those projects are the first ones to be eliminated. Or if the project that I'm working on, or the team that I'm working on, or the division that I'm working in is not part of a core business, or it's not making a lot of money, because those are all indicators that it might be targeted for a downsizing. And this brings me to the next major reason is cost-cutting measures. Oftentimes, employees who work in these experimental divisions or divisions that are not making any money will often be targeted in a cost-cutting measure. They may spin off that organization and lay the people off, or they may just eliminate or de-emphasize the project altogether. And oftentimes that's due to cost cutting. But it's also very common that companies will go department by department looking for people who make the most money. And then they'll circle them on the list, and then they'll compare that to the amount of output or the amount of skill that you possess. And that's oftentimes where people who are senior in their career end up getting circled on a layoff list, because their skill has somewhat atrophied, or they haven't kept pace with the market, but they've managed to get a really large salary. And so it becomes a relatively easy decision to circle their name on the list, because they can just replace it with somebody cheaper. And because overall payroll is one of the biggest expenses in a company, you can expect that it'll be scrutinized very closely during economic uncertainty, and especially with disruptive technologies like AI becoming more prevalent, and they can potentially eliminate more positions that way. Next up, we have voluntary severance programs, and oftentimes companies will offer voluntary severance to people who want to take advantage of an early retirement or potentially a relatively lucrative package that might be better for them to take than being forcibly laid off themselves. So they'll dangle a pretty sweet deal in front of people, hoping that a certain percentage of the workforce will take it. And if they don't take it, then whatever remaining workforce still needs to be eliminated. Then they'll start using the other criteria on the list. And actually, the first company that I ever worked for, I actually took a voluntary severance because it was a lot of money for me at the time, and I didn't feel like I was very utilized in my role. And so I was young enough and didn't have any responsibilities that it made sense for me to do it. And that would be considered a reason for a layoff as well. So is that technically a layoff? Maybe, maybe not. You could probably argue the semantics of it, but in essence, you're being, in a way, forcibly removed from the company, so I guess you could call it a layoff. And finally, I'd be remiss to say that legal and ethical considerations aren't taken into account when layoffs are happening, because let's face it, in some cases they probably are, even if it's hush-hush. So I'm thinking in particular age-based discrimination, where you have certain groups of people above a certain age group, and again, some of the other factors about wages, etc., come into play, but they might be targeting people without saying it, or getting rid of what they consider the quote-unquote dinosaurs. And of course, there's other considerations around the other protected classes, gender, creed, color, etc. And let's face it, there are some unscrupulous companies out there. So I think we need to at least address that elephant in the room. So those are the most common reasons why companies would lay off a person to begin with. And I know that it seems very unfair, but the reality is that companies can do whatever they want. And with at-will employment, it is what it is. And now we're faced with what used to be a really promising career suddenly being derailed by an untimely layoff. But that's exactly why it's in your best interest to reclaim control and begin acting like the CEO of your career. And we do that through building out our skill sets to make sure that we're the most in demand that we can be based on what the overall market is demanding and not just our company. But we're also making sure that our resume is always up to date, and we're considering other opportunities if they suit our long-term career vision. And of course, you don't want to neglect your networking. And I'm probably going to be networking with the competitors at the same time, just so I'm well connected in the industry in case I need it, because those targeted networks are the key to landing better job opportunities. And I know that for some reason people are really weird about this, but multiple streams of income are so very important to being able to reclaim control in your career, because when you no longer are completely dependent on an employer to pay all of your bills, then you completely free yourself up to truly be in control. So focus on building multiple streams of income at the same time. And to me, that's a non-negotiable. And if you need more help landing on your feet after an untimely layoff, that's exactly what I specialize in. I've got a website called lifeafterlayoff.com, which is loaded with tips and strategies, all from a recruiting perspective. And I share my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses. The first one is called Resume Rocketfuel, which is designed to teach you exactly how to write a resume that is going to give you the best chance at getting those recruiters to start taking notice of you. I provide you templates and I walk you through step by step while I write my own resume beside you and teach you exactly what recruiters are looking for. And once you get the first round interview, it's up to you to market yourself throughout the rest of the interviewing process. That's where the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp comes in. It actually takes you all the way from job search through job offer and all the steps in between, including the interviewing. And we break down each step in great detail. I give you tips and strategies on how to ace each round and ultimately get to the job offer, and then how to negotiate it so you don't leave any money on the table. But if you're serious about your job search, you have to start leveraging targeted networking. Targeted networking is the secret ingredient here, and it is so critically important. In fact, if I had to choose between the two, I would probably choose targeted networking over even having a resume. That's how important it is. And the good news is if you can leverage the power of LinkedIn, you can actually skip the recruiter altogether and jump right to the front of the line. And I teach you exactly how to do those things in the course Unlocking LinkedIn. But your overarching career strategy is so critically important to set the foundation for the rest of your career if you're serious about actually reclaiming control and becoming your own CEO. And that's where the Ultimate Career Blueprint comes in. And I teach you exactly how to map out your career so that you have the best chance of success of reaching that career summit. Anyway, hopefully you found this video to be enlightening. And I assure you, if you got laid off, it does not mean that you're damaged goods, and it does not automatically mean that you're a performance issue. So keep that in mind. Keep your chin up. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.